Thank you. Thank you for waking up, first of all. If you have been awake all night, welcome to stop number 7 on the pub crawl. There's no booze here, but you're not going to know anyway, because you're pretty much done. So thank you in general. This is my 5th year on the MozCon stage. And as some of you know, it's been a rough couple of months here at Moz. We really appreciate the support of our customers and the community. And what's amazing is that our customers are our community in many ways. And so we hope you'll see, as we go through this refocus on search, on core search, on Moz Pro and local, that there are a lot of things in the pipe and good things to come. And I hope you'll stick with us through that. But thank you for being with us. Thank you for being here. So, oh, it's okay. One of my screens looks weird, sorry. You're used to me coming up here and talking about how the SERPs are changing. And what's cool in a way is that we just launched SERP features for Moz Pro. Rob was up here yesterday. This topic I've talked about for the last couple of years has kind of become mainstream. I'm glad to have other people talk about it. I'm glad to have Rob here yesterday talking about it better than I probably would. And so I want to take a little different approach today. And I want to talk not about how 10 blue links and the things around them are changing, but how searches themselves are changing, how we are changing as searchers. And the thing about that is, as searches change, Google has to adapt. And as Google changes, we have to adapt. And so I want to talk about how search has changed from the searcher perspective and how that's changing things like keyword research. So the first stop on this journey is something that happened in April, around May of 2013. Google launched conversational search on desktop. And it seemed like a toy. It was essentially voice search on desktop. And still, most of us don't run voice searches on desktop. But voice search was coming. It was evolving on mobile. And I think what you have to realize that is Google had to adapt to the kind of searches people were making on voice. And what's different about this is with mobile, you can sometimes look and say, well, you know what, only 5% of our traffic is mobile. Maybe we'll wait. Maybe we're not sure. But with voice search, Google had to change all searches. They had to change the core engine to adapt to voice search. So for all of us, whether we use that modality or not, things started to change about 3 years ago. And in August of the same year, we got the Hummingbird update. And update is probably a poor choice of words. Danny Sullivan has said it's like we put a new engine in the car. This was a core rewrite of the Google algorithm. And like caffeine before it, the thing that we don't sometimes realize is that everybody wanted to know, what did Hummingbird do? What did it do that day? What was the update? What Hummingbird did was power changes for the next 3 years, even through now and for the next couple of years to come. And much of that power was around dealing with these more complex long-tail voice searches and building the infrastructure and the speed Google would need to do that. And so ever since Hummingbird, things have been evolving because they have that new platform and that new power. And then October 2015, Google announced Rankbrain. And a couple months ago, I want to tie in Rankbrain. A couple months ago, I made this bad decision. I said, you know what? When I get up at MozCon, I'm only going to talk about what I'm 80% sure is true about Rankbrain. And I stared at that blank page for about 5 minutes. I said, all right, either I'm going to have to start making stuff up or this is going to be really tough. And so I did it the hard way. So I'm going to try to stick today to what I think is mostly true about Rankbrain. And I'm going to try not to speculate. You've heard a lot of speculation. One thing I know is probably true. Rankbrain launched in April of 2015, even though it was announced in October. Some of that reason I think that's true I can't talk about, but thankfully Stephen Levy published a post where he leaked April 2015 in that, and some people got a little nervous about that, and apparently he wasn't supposed to say it. So I'm just going to tell you that that's probably pretty true. So Rankbrain had been in play about 6 months before it was released, or before the announcement. And it's been over a year now. So this is something we've been living with for a while. So I want to talk about the kind of changes that have popped up. So this is the kind of a classic query, the way we would have typed it pre-voice. We'd say something like space needle height. And don't worry about the knowledge graph here, but what I'm trying to show is that Google understands what this means, right? They can return the actual height. They return relevant organic results. But in 2016, we can also do a search like, what is the height of the Space Needle? And get virtually the same results. Google understands this, they can parse it, and they can return that height. And we can even get a little stranger and say, how tall is the Space Needle in meters? Google knows what we're talking about. They can do that translation. They understand this semantically. They're not just trying to match those results, but they know what this means. They can equate all three of these queries. So how do we deal with this as search marketers from a keyword research perspective? Well, we've read a lot of posts. You probably read a lot of posts recently about, well, target concepts, OK? And OK, let's say we have this concept of tallness, right? And tall and height are kind of synonyms. Size and big are sort of related, and we've got units like feet and meters. So let's group that whole thing into the concept of tallness. OK, that kind of makes sense. That's true, right? So what do? Just build great concepts. There you go. Any questions? I got 40 minutes. OK, how many in the audience have ever been told or read to just build great content? Raise your hands. Have you ever heard that, right? So here's the problem. We can laugh about it, but it's true. It's fundamentally good advice. It's a little loaded because anything great is usually good advice. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to get up and I'm going to build shit content today. Like, it's sort of in there. Great is great. But the problem is that it's just not tactical. And the problem I have when we say to target concepts and not keywords is that this isn't what we do as search marketers because of this. You have to type something into the box. And so if I tell you to target concepts, even though we know concepts are real, we know all of these very different searches are coming together to form a concept, you still have to type something into that box. So what is it? And that's what I want to try and talk about today. I got to always do the scary stuff, like you didn't know what was going on and wake you up a little bit. So these are those slides. So let's start with the stuff you kind of know, right? We used to, if you sold scarves, you would stuff everything into the title. It's like, buy scarf, scarves, scarves. On sale, cheap now, right? We all did it. Come on. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but you did it. So we know Google's gotten better at this, right? They can equate these things. If I type a search like scarf, I'm going to try and show you what they're matching to using their own highlighting. The highlighting algorithm and the search algorithm are not necessarily the same, but I think they're related enough that we can kind of see, OK, Google knows that scarves with an FS and scarves with a VES match scarf. OK, we know they can do that. I can flip it around if I type in proxies, plural, and I wasn't buying proxies, definitely. Google knows that proxy with a Y is a match. They can do stemming. If I type in ballroom dancing, they understand that it matches dance, dances, dancers. Those are basically the same in this context. If I type in Warner Brothers, they know that they actually go by Warner Bros, which, it's 2016, come on. But you look at the top few results, the word brothers is not in them. Google is directly equating this. They didn't have to put Warner Bros / brothers. They can do this. If I type in SNL skits, they know that SNL, Saturday Night Live, I don't even have to have SNL in there. They can flip it the other way. This is a clothing store, not your daughter's jeans. They actually go by NYDJ. The results are all NYDJ. Those are the same to Google. That's where it's going to start to get a little weirder. Reverse directory, which can have some spammy people in it. Almost every one of the results above the fold actually matches reverse lookup. It doesn't use the word directory at all. Google is equating those two synonyms. You don't have to mention that word. Discount airfare matches discount flights, cheap tickets, discount flights. All of these are the same in Google's eyes. This one is a little weird. So we've got two abbreviations, right? NJDMV, the New Jersey Department of Motor Vehicles. But here's the thing that's cool. In New Jersey, it's not called the DMV. It's called the Motor Vehicle Commission. Google can match NJDMV to New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission and New Jersey MVC. I don't even have to have the words Department of Motor Vehicles or DMV on my site. They understand that these two concepts are the same. If I ask what production car holds the top speed records, I don't have to have the words top production car. I can just have Veyron Supersport and Bugatti Veyron. They know that the answer is a relevant match to the question. this is a completely different world of keyword research than we're used to. Upscale department stores matches luxury department stores, okay, but it also matches Barney's, Bergdorf Goodman, Saks Fifth Avenue, Nordstrom's, Neiman Marcus. Google actually knows that the department stores themselves, the brands, are relevant to this query. And here's one for horoscope dates. They match zodiac, okay, that's cool. They match actual dates. May 21st through June 20th is being shown as a relevance match to the word dates. Google gets that this is relevant. So this has come a long way, and this is what we see now. This is not what's coming, this is what's here now. So you know what to do. You just take all these words, and you jam them into meta keywords, right? We know how to do this. Okay, you've stopped doing this, I hope. But what's sad is this doesn't even actually work in theory, let alone in meta keywords. So let's say you're trying to sell blenders. And you go, okay, I need all the versions, right? I need blenders and blender and blended, and I'm going to have to put that on my page. Well, this is a search for blenders. Okay, this is what we expect. We got shopping results, we have an ad. This is a SERP where Google says, I think you want to buy blenders. But this is a search for Blender. And this is the Blender Foundation, an open source 3D graphics platform. And this entire SERP is around that brand and around the Blender Foundation. And Google sees that as the dominant intent. So the results for Blender and blenders now are completely different. And one is not a good match for you. And this is Blended, the Drew Barrymore Adam Sandler movie. That has nothing to do with blenders. It's not as bad as you might think it is, but I'm not going to recommend you actually watch it. But this is the entire SERP. So if you're going and saying, well, I know I need these words that are all kind of, these aren't even the right words for you and the right combinations. So what do we do in this world where Google is not only equating these very disparate keywords as concepts, but sometimes they're saying that these things we think are the same aren't the same because they know that most people searching for blended want the movie, not blended drinks. All right. To make it worse, of course, the algorithm is learning now. We have machine learning in play. I apologize for this slide because I thought it was really funny when I put it up there, and then I realized that I have a PhD in experimental psychology, and it was normal to walk around and have people with brains in jars. And I once got on the elevator, and my friend had like a brain in the jar, and I was just like, hey, dude, nice brain. And this was a normal human interaction for me in graduate school, so then I put it up, and I thought, maybe some people don't really like the whole brain in the jar thing. So I left it up for 2 minutes and talked about it. But to me, that's hilarious. I don't know. All right. So deep learning. We know one thing about Rankbrain, we think, and that's that it uses deep learning. All right, what's deep learning? Wikipedia. Deep learning is a branch of machine learning. All right, we can do that. Based on a set of algorithms, well, we know algorithms, we're comfortable so far, that attempt to model high-level abstractions, all right, in data by using a deep graph with multiple processing layers composed of multiple linear and nonlinear transformations. Yeah, all right. So I got 10 minutes to explain deep learning, which took about 2 months of learning to condense this into 10 minutes. This is a neural network. Actually, I did work on neural networks in the mid to late 90s. So what we're trying to do with the neural network is model the way the brain works. So we know the brain has these neurons in a neural network, they're called nodes, and there's connections between them. And by the strength and the signaling of the connections between these neurons, if you put thousands and millions and trillions of them together, we have trillions of connections, amazing things happen, and we get the way we think. And so we tried to model that. And the way a neural network works, a simple neural network, this is a very simple one, is we have these inputs and we have these outputs we want to achieve. So we want to put something into the machine and we want to get something out, right? And so we have this input layer of nodes and we have this output layer, and we're trying to build something in between that can model that input to output. And why we do this, you might say, why don't we just use like a lookup table? Why don't we just put all the things into a table and say, if you put in this input, we get this output? Because what we do with the neural network and what we do with machine learning is we put in this data to train it, but then the machine itself can handle new inputs that it's never seen before. So the machine has the ability to adapt to new things it hasn't seen. That's why we build this. And we use models like backpropagation. I won't get deep into this, but I have an analogy. So we actually start from the output, and we train the machine back to the input. If you've ever been to a restaurant with a kid, or you were a kid, and you have the maze on the placemat, and the maze was a little harder than you thought it would be, especially if you're like 46 like me and you're like, this is kind of embarrassing because this maze is a little too hard for me. You may have started from the end and worked your way back to the beginning. That's kind of how backprop works. So we have this model. And the thing about neural networks in the 90s was they were kind of cool and they did some novel things, but they couldn't really do anything particularly interesting. And so we abandoned them for a while. And then we got more computing power, and things got faster, and by magnitude, huge magnitudes over the course of 10 years. And so I'm going to really grossly oversimplify it, but deep learning is basically this times about 1 million. And I'm not playing a Dr. Evil exaggeration here. I actually was talking to Dr. Matt in our data science department, and I was like, yeah, I used to build these neural networks, with like 8 nodes or something, on like 3 or 4 hidden layers. Like, how many parameters he's building in this model? I'm going to show you. And you're like, how many parameters is that? It's like about 3.5 million. So this is, in some ways, quantity over quality. There's been new math behind this. There's new things we had to build to make this possible. But what we basically found is after a decade of increases in computing power, suddenly deep learning can do some amazing things. So Google has kind of told us they use it. I want to give you a couple clues about what they've said that you might have missed. Google has a course online on Udacity, a deep learning course that is taught by Google. And there's a quiz in this course where they actually ask you, how might you use deep learning to power Google search? And then they give you what they think the answer might be. Well, this is the answer slide. So a classifier is just the thing that basically takes the input and says, well, how likely is a certain output? So the answer to the quiz is use a classifier that takes the pair, query and web page, as an input and classifies the pair as relevant and not relevant. And what they're showing you here is that if somebody types in Udacity deep learning, machine learning and supervised learning should be relevant, and that you can do this with deep learning. And strangely, this looks a little bit like the kind of queries we saw before. And so, this is Google saying, hey, let me give you this little clue. This is kind of what we're doing. That Stephen Levy paper, definitely worth reading. This is a quote with Google, with Jeff Dean, who's in the machine learning group, that said, by early 2014, Google's machine learning masters believe that should change. I'm going to tell you what that is. That is the heuristic approach to search, the ranking factors approach we all know, championed by Amit Singhal since he joined the group and ran search for years. Did amazing things. But at some point, the machine learning people said, we think we can do something different. So Jeff said we had a series of discussions with the ranking team. We said we should try this and see, is there any gain to be had? Let's just try it, because Amit was very resistant to turning some of this over to machine learning. The experiment his team had in mind turned out to be central to search how well a document in the ranking matches a query, as measured by whether the user clicks on it. I'm not going to speculate on that, but kind of interesting to see that said. We sort of said, let's just compute the score and see what happens. OK, fine. So about 2 years ago, they did this experiment. This experiment worked extremely well. So well that they changed their direction on search. Amit left. The head of machine learning took his job. No one has speculated on the politics of that, and I won't because I'm not at Google and I don't know. But it is no coincidence that the champion of the old way was replaced by the champion of the new way. And the champion of the new way is the head of machine learning. So there was a major shift about 2 years ago. We also have some clues. Google has a site called TensorFlow, which is a platform for developing machine learning that you can use. So it's very powerful, deep learning specifically. And they also released a model that they call Tyvek. And I want to just kind of explain generally what this does. So we have these very crude ways of matching relevance, matching a keyword to a document that we used to use. And they've evolved over time to things that some of you may have heard of, like LSI and LDA, that we've talked about in the past. And these models can kind of understand words in context, but they don't really understand relationships really well. They don't really understand phrases well and how they relate to each other and kind of the semantics. And so there's a deep learning model called Tyvek, and what it does, a vector, I'm not going to give a linear algebra talk here, but a vector is a point in 3D space with a direction. And so they try to translate words into vectors based just on huge, huge amounts of words in context. So the machine, this is unsupervised. The machine is kind of learning about all these words in context. And what they found is with this deep learning model, it begins to understand relationships. So there's a couple examples here where if you look at where king and queen fall in space and you look at man and woman, they have the same relationship. if you look at walking versus walked and swimming versus swam, the machine learns that these have the same relationship. The machine learns this without us telling them, without us trying to build the rules. So suddenly we have a model for relevance, a very advanced model for relevance, where we can teach Google, we can teach the algorithm how the relationships between words work. This is not a coincidence. We think this is what's in play. We know for a fact that Rankbrain is not query translation. So if you typed in Justin Bieberlake, Google rightly says you meant Justin Timberlake, and not that other bad man who we don't speak of. It's a very personal topic for me. This is query translation. This is Google saying, there's no such person as Justin Bieberlake. You're an idiot. We think you meant this. That's query translation. That's not what's happening in the age of Rankbrain. If you look at NJDMV that I showed you before, New Jersey, NJDMV are all in there being matched. And so is MVC and Motor Vehicle Commission. This is all happening in real time at the same time. Google is not saying, oh, NJDMV equals New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission, so we're only going to match this thing we translated to. No, they're matching everything in real time all at once. This is not query translation. This is a new way of factoring in relevance. Is this specific query Rankbrain? I don't know. I'm going to say two things about that. One, it doesn't matter in a sense. This is real. This is what we're dealing with today. What you call it isn't that important. But Dr. Matt in data science built a prototype a couple months ago. I'm going to tell you right now, this is not available and you can't use it, and I'm sorry. And I'll probably get a star docked off on my ratings right now. But I'm not going to announce that you can use it 20 minutes from now. We are trying to build some of this into product. And he came with an idea, and he said, well, I've got this idea. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'd be interested. And he's like, oh, well, I already kind of built it. So let me show you. And this is just kind of a piece of that. And so what this does is take a query, and it pulls up the SERPs, and it uses a deep learning model to try and figure out what's relevant. And this model, we can type in New Jersey DMV, and we can see that one of the results, State of New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission, is considered high similarity, about 96%. So what I'm saying is, I'm not sure if that previous slide is Rankbrain, but we can build a deep learning model that basically produces the same result. So we're converging on the idea that Rankbrain very likely, or deep learning, Rankbrain may be broader, deep learning very likely has a role in determining relevance in 2016. So, all right, thank you for sitting through that, that 10 minutes. So what do we do about it? I do want to make this tactical, and obviously that's the tough part of all this. All right. I'm going to do something I don't usually do. This is Keyword Explorer. I'm going to use one of our products as a context. I'm not trying to sell it to you. You can do this the hard way, the old way with Excel and paper and pencil, whatever tools you want to use. I'm going to try and give you a method you can use. But I'm going to use Keyword Explorer as a context because in building it, we really did build it from the standpoint of how we ourselves do keyword research and where we think we need to be in the next year. And so it does echo the kind of approach I'm talking about. So let's go back to that Space Needle height example. And we pull up our keyword research, our real basic research, and we get 1,000 results back. All right, how do we target that? Well, we could build 1,000 pages. And we used to do this. And it was stupid, and we've stopped, I hope. I hope you've stopped. If you haven't stopped, stop. Or we could stuff a bunch of it just into one paragraph, and we could get a paragraph like this. Space Needle height. The Space Needle height Seattle is 605 feet. The Space Needle height in Stories is just over 60. It's interesting to note, it's not interesting at all, that the Space Needle height comparison to the Empire State Building is about half as high. In contrast, the Seattle Space Needle height comparison to Chicago's Willis Tower is only about 1/3 the height. I'm actually very proud of this crap SEO copy that I wrote. But you know and I know it's not natural. We stuff these very similar phrases into a paragraph. This is not how people talk. It's not how people write. It's what we're trying to get away from. So we don't want to do that either. And truthfully, that's still only about 5 phrases, and we got 995 to go. That's going to be a pretty lousy experience. So in Keyword Explorer, we have this grouping option. And it does what you think it does. We're putting very similar keywords into groups. And this is something you can do. You know that there are a whole lot of phrases that are only going to vary by a couple words. They have basically the same concept. We can group those. And let's say I pick 3 groups. So I've got groups that are a little bit different. Space Needle How Tall, which is a little more question-oriented. Space Needle Height, our original. And Height and Stories, which is conceptually a bit different. So let's say I pick these 3 groups. These are essentially concepts, okay? But one way I might go about targeting them is to pick a representative phrase for each concept. I went through about 50 names, like exemplars and prototypes and archetypes. I'm just going to call them ideals. So pick an ideal phrase that represents the concept. And so when I pick these 3 concepts, I end up with something like, how tall is the Space Needle, height of the Space Needle, and Space Needle is blank stories. So now I'm trying to kind of pick something that fits more of a natural language profile. And then I can write a paragraph like this. How tall is the Space Needle? The height of the Space Needle in Seattle, Washington is 605 feet, including the antenna. Interestingly, while the Space Needle is approximately 60 stories tall, it only occupies 6 floors, so with most of the tower being structural. While it was once the tallest building in Seattle, the Space Needle now ranks only 7th. I got all of my phrases in there, and even an extra one. It sounds much more human, but here's the thing that you might be missing. If I go back to that original grouping page, that Space Needle height category represents 300 keywords. This paragraph in my original 1,000 keyword research represents about 500 keywords. And so by taking my keywords, grouping in the concept, and bringing that concept back into kind of an idealized phrase, I'm still targeting keywords, but I'm using those to target much, much, much larger groups and not creating this kind of spammy junk. So I'm going to call this approach the 3 Gs. It took like 3 days to come up with things that all had the same letter. I went through like the 3 Cs and the 3 Fs. The 3 Gs is where we landed. So let's go back to our blenders situation. So the first thing we do, we gather all the keywords, get our big list. Here, we return 1,000 at a time. You know how it goes. It could be 50,000 by the time you're done. And we pick these groups. We put them into groups. These are kind of our concepts. So for blenders, let's say we ended up with best for smoothies, best for frozen drinks, best blenders money. And we generate these ideal phrases. So best blenders for smoothies, top-rated blenders for frozen drinks. What's the best blender for the money? And now by using these ideal phrases, we can target the concepts and hopefully dozens or 100 keywords all at once. But we're not dealing with the concept as some kind of generic space. These are actual phrases that we can do all the things with that we've typically done. So how do you pick those ideal phrases within a group? All right, I'm going to pitch Keyword Explorer a little bit here. And if those of you who are Moz Pro customers already use it and can already use it for free. We have a score called Potential that I help build that takes volume, difficulty, opportunity, and kind of helps you find the sweet spot. And so one thing it'll let you do actually is take an entire group, turn it into a list, and find the keywords in it that sort of have the best combination. So we pick something like best blender for smoothies. The other thing we could do down the road that we'd like to be able to do is use deep learning to fight deep learning. So what Matt's tool actually will let you do is enter in multiple phrases, look at all the results that come back, and tell you what matches all the phrases best on average. And so we can type in something like best blender for smoothies, best smoothie blender reviews, best blenders for green smoothies, smoothie maker reviews, and it comes back and says, you know what, the best smoothie blenders for every budget is a pretty good match to the whole mess. And you'd do all right if you had something like that. This is where we're headed. As Google uses deep learning more, we are headed to having to build deep learning-based tools, and that's what this is. So there may come a time where we're able to say to you, you know what, given this entire group of 500 keywords, this is actually what we think you should target. Maybe these 5 would cover it pretty well. So we hope that's coming. But I think you can still conceptually do this even without deep learning. So again, gather, group, generate, scoop up all your keywords, put them into these conceptual groups, and then from every group, pick an idealized phrase. Now, there's one more step, and I'm going to call it gap, which is this. You might be thinking, OK, so do these become our keywords? Do these become our keywords that we rank, track, and that we do all our traditional kind of SEO activities on? I'm going to say no. These are keywords that you're going to build content around. But there's going to be gaps. You're not going to know exactly. You're making your best guess of how Google could take this entire group of keywords and kind of turn it into one useful thing. But it's going to leave some stuff out. So we're still going to try and rank track. We're still going to follow Google results across as many of those originals as possible. Look for the gaps, and then use those gaps to refine these concepts or essentially add a few more. But the goal at the end of the day is that not only are we kind of representing concepts as Google sees them, but instead of trying to craft content in pages around thousands of key phrases, maybe we're just using dozens or hundreds that really represent that entire group, and we're going about it in a more intelligent way. All right. So you may look at this and say, well, why don't we just write for people? Right? Why can't we just write for humans? And you can't, and that would be a good thing. If you have the choice between SEO, keyword spam, stuffing, and writing for people in 2016, write for people. But the reason I'm going to suggest we not just do that is basically this. We go back to early days of Google, say 1999. We have that heuristic approach. If this, then that. More complicated than that, but basically the set of rules that became the ranking factor. And now we've moved on to machine learning. But machine learning is still not people. It doesn't understand relationships. It doesn't understand semantics in the way we do. And so we're not there yet. And so you can write for people, and you'll be in pretty good shape. The best thing you could do is understand how Google tries to emulate how we think and to match this process. And so there is still a technical SEO aspect where I think, yeah, you'll do OK if you stick to the far right. But if you can master that middle ground and understand what Google's doing with Rankbrain, understand how they're treating relevance, you're going to be a lot better off. So we've come this far. We can go from these old queries like space needle height to how tall is a space needle. And there are ways for us to represent that in our keyword research and take thousands of phrases and reduce them. I want to leave you with kind of one last thought. I think it's easy to look at this and say, well, voice search is kind of a gimmick, right? And we're going to have to learn to do voice search over the next year or two, and some people aren't going to adapt to that. And what I want to say is I think that's completely wrong. I don't think we have to learn to do voice search. I think, somebody in the mid-40s who's been using search since the beginning, we unlearned voice search. Voice search is our natural modality. We talk in phrases. But when early search engines came out, early search engines were dumb. And so we became dumb. And we typed these 1 and 2 and 3 word queries. And that's how we started to do SEO and keyword research, because search engines were dumb, and that's how they work. So what we're doing now is not learning to do voice search, we're untraining ourselves. And if you have kids, you've seen this. I have an Amazon Echo at home, the kids use Siri. They talk in sentences. They walk up to it, they use voice. It's natural for them. They will never do these strange, cryptic 2 and 3 word queries in their lives, because they'll never have to, because search engines won't be that dumb again. So we aren't learning to do this, we're unlearning. And Google has to adapt the entire algorithm to this. So it doesn't matter whether your voice search is 1% or 5% or 10%. This is affecting all of us right now. It's been affecting us, all of us, for 3 years. So again, I hope you'll try this process. Gather, group, generate. The whole idea, to break it down, is we're going from keywords to concept back to keywords so that we still have something tactical to do and we can still pursue our keyword research. So, I think that's it. I got time for questions. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome, Pete. Thanks.
I'm a little fast.
So we got a couple questions here. The first one is, are related topics and related queries in Google Trends a good place to learn about how machine learning, how Google understands our target concepts?
Yeah, I think so. We don't know exactly what engine they're using for related questions, but it does tell us what they think is relevant. Related questions, as Rob said yesterday, is actually great for feature snippets, for seeing from a query what kind of questions might be associated with that. So if you're trying to target a featured snippet especially, you can say, hey, you know what? Based on my core queries, these are the kind of questions Google matches to that. They're not seeing that always as directly relevant, but it's taking you on this kind of journey of what they match, 2 related searches, 2 related questions, 3 or 4 steps down the road. So it can really start to expand your research, yeah.
So the question I was going to ask actually came up here too, is what's the status and outlook of this in international? Are the same algorithms applied in languages other than English?
As far as we know, because Rankbrain was deep learning based, it doesn't care. So it is supposedly out globally.
So
I have not measured the impact in other.
What about, is there do you have any estimation on the percentage of queries that Rankbrain covers? Or are there any queries that don't have?
Yeah, so this is Google has tried to explain this, but I think they purposely made it confusing. Everything. but it doesn't always have an impact. So Rankbrain this is a new relevance engine. So this is replacing how we used to measure relevance. So Rankbrain is always there saying, what's relevant to this, and trying to take a broader view. But in some cases, that's going to be very, very similar to what it used to be.
Right.
So it's always there, it's always operating, but it might only be a few % of queries that it really impacts in a heavy way. It's certainly impacting very long tail queries, questions, things like that, more than the narrow ones. But we can see even with that kind of blenders example, that's probably not Rankbrain, but Google is looking at the context of searches. They look at what people are clicking on, and they're saying, hey, these are really conceptually 3 very different things. And so all of this new stuff is operating on basically everything. But whether it's actually changed any given query for you, that's what you kind of have to dig in and see.
OK. Well, thank you very much.